Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm reviewing Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, and I gave this book a 3 out of 5. Today, my Booktuber Shoutout goes out to Books with Lexi. She's been on Booktube for quite a bit, and I came across her channel during the holiday readings and rapathons and hackathons and etc. And she has a pretty fun channel. She does a lot of rankings, a lot of TBR, TBREDs, wrap-ups, and tags. If you want to check out her channel, I'll link it down below. And as always, before I go to my full book review, if you're watching my content, I always appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you have read this book, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, I'd love to hear what you thought of it down below. This book was actually one of the top books on GOODREADS for 2022. It is published in 2022, and the genre is fiction. A bit about the author, Gabrielle Zevin. She is of mixed heritage. Her father is American born and he has Jewish, Russian, Lithuanian, and Polish ancestry. Her mother was born in Korea, and so she's Korean, and she immigrated to the US when she was 9 years old, and that's where she met Gabrielle's father. And yeah, that's how they met. Gabrielle studied at Harvard and graduated in 2000, and she majored in English with a concentration in American literature at University of Harvard. That's where she met her now partner, Hans Canosa, which she actually wrote a screenplay for one of his movies that came out in 2005, which actually has two prolific actors, Helena Bonham Carter and Aaron Eckhart, and the movie is called Conversations with Other Women. I'm actually surprised because I'm actually a huge fan of Aaron Eckhart, but I haven't heard that movie yet. But it is an independent film, so I'm definitely go check that out. So in addition to Gabrielle writing this novel, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, she also writes screenplays, as she did for this movie, Conversations with Other Women. And she also has written another book called The Story Life of AJ Fikri, which I read 2 years ago. And that was actually a really interesting book for me to read, because I was looking at my Goodreads review for that book, and the first 80% of the book I would have given it a 4 out of 5. Or sorry, yeah, 4 out of 5. Oh no, I think my Goodreads review said that the first 80% of the book I actually would have given it a 2 or a 3, but the last 20% of the book turned it around and became a 4 out of 5, which is interesting because for me, this book started out as a 4 out of 5 up until the last 20-30%, and it kind of petered off to like the 3 that I finally gave. The premise of this book was pretty interesting for me, and when I first started, I almost wanted to give it a really high rating. Is that it spans over several decades and talks about the relationship and the friendship between two characters, Sadie and Samson. They meet when they're really young, I think 11 and 12, and it's due to Sadie. She's always at the children's hospital because her sister Alice is battling cancer, and then Samson, he is in the hospital quite a bit because he got into a major accident previously, and it was having like reconstructive surgery on his foot. So they actually become friends at this children's hospital, and they bond over playing video games together. And why this is significant is because up until Samson meets Sadie at his hospital post his accident, for several weeks he refused to talk to anyone because the accident was very traumatic for him. And then, not to spoil the story, because I do think this book is worth reading, even though I gave it like an average rating. They have a falling out, even though they're 11 years old, and don't talk for several years until later on in university when Sadie is at MIT, I believe, and then Samson's at Harvard, and are both in fields related to like game design and computer design. They cross paths again, and they just decide to make and create a video game together. It becomes super successful, and then basically their lives are intertwined up until their like 40s. And this book is just very interesting because you don't need to be a video game person, because I personally don't play any video games, but I think if you're a video game person, this book is extra good. It kind of reminds me of like Ready Player One, because there is a lot of call out to things that happen in reality in the video game world and in the history of humans. So this book is super interesting because there's that blend of fiction and non-fiction. And it's really great to see Sadie and Samson's friendship through the years teetering onto a relationship, and also it's just a really great story. I'll briefly go over the main characters in the book just because I do think it's relevant when it comes to the themes and also things I like and didn't like. So the first one is Sadie. She is of Jewish American descent. There's Samson, or later he becomes and reinvents himself as Sam Mazer. He's half Korean, half Jewish. He was raised by his mom, who's Korean, Anna Lee, and his father is Jewish, but he never really gets to know his father, unfortunately. There's also Marks, who is Samson's roommate in college, and who kind of becomes like the trio of musketeers when it comes to designing video games with Samson and Sadie. Marks doesn't actually design the video games, but he kind of becomes a producer, the marketing person, the person that eventually runs the video game company, and he is half Korean, half Japanese, but faux Asian. And then there's also the grandparents of Samson, who basically raise him, whose name is Dong and Bone, and they run a pizza parlor in Koreatown. And I think it's really cool because Gabrielle, the author herself, is half Asian. So I think it's really cool that she addresses people living in America who present as faux Asian or half Asian, and how society interacts with them, especially through the 90s and 2000s. This book has several common themes that I really enjoyed, which again, I said almost gave it a 4 or 5 for me, but the plot, the characters in the end just was an average 3. But one topic that I really enjoyed in this book is the idea of friendship, especially between a heterosexual woman and man, and how it doesn't always have to be romantic, but maybe there could be moments where it could be romantic. But with Sadie and Samson's relationship, it's more intimate in some ways than a romantic relationships, and their passion for their work and their creativity and their video games supersedes all of that. And I really love following their friendship through decades and how there were ups and downs, and it wasn't always like good. And I think it's very realistic of a friendship where you work together and have a lot of passion together. Also, another thing I really enjoyed about this book is the idea of death. I don't want to spoil the book, obviously, but throughout Samson's life, he deals with death quite a bit, either people close to him or just witnessing death. And because this book is very intertwined with video games, there's the idea of how people use video games as a form of escapism, because in a video game, you can die over and over again and you just go back to where you last saved, or you just restart the game. You always have all these chances, but in reality, in life, you don't have that. And maybe that's why people love video games, because you can't escape from the reality of death. And also, like, death is so final. So yeah, I just really love the conversation around death in this book. Another common theme I noticed throughout this book, as it spans several decades from when they're 11 to 10 to their like 40s, is the idea of trauma in your childhood and how it can affect you, and how you can hang-ups that affect your interpersonal relationships in your adulthood. One thing that's very prominent in this book is Samson. As I mentioned before, he was in an accident when he was young, and he was going through reconstructive foot surgery when he met Sadie in the hospital. And because of this, he in a way has a disability with his foot. He can't walk well, and because of it, he kind of sees himself as kind of like this disfigured person who maybe doesn't deserve certain relationships or deserves certain attention from people in his life. And it's just really sad. And he is so much more than his disability, but it's something that he can't really shake. And actually, one thing I realized from this book that I probably really enjoyed is the relationship between Sadie, Samson, and Marks. It kind of reminds me of The Hunchback of Notre Dame with Quasimodo, Esmeralda, and Phoebus the Knight. If you have watched that movie and read this book, I'd love to hear your commentary down below on the parallels that you see. Things I didn't enjoy about this book, to be honest, up until the last third of the book, I quite enjoy it. But one thing that I didn't like, and I think that's why I gave it a 3 overall, is there were too many lessons and points that the author tried to push across, that I felt like, it almost felt like how I watched Avatar 2, if you've seen that movie, it came out recently, where there's just too many lessons and objectives the authors were trying to push, almost like too many social justice issues to touch on, which maybe weren't relevant or prominent in the 90s and early 2000s, but yet the characters were very self-aware of these issues. And that's why I said that I talked about the ethnicity of the characters earlier on, because lots of microaggressions are talked about in this book, and how they were raised in the 90s and 2000s. And I'm sure they were obviously real situations that happened, but I just wasn't sure if back then our society was quite aware of these issues. And because of that, it kind of took me away from the reality of these characters, especially in the last third of the book. Yeah, also, I don't want to ruin the book because I do think it's worth reading, but there is a situation that happens towards the end of the book where it's definitely a big, I guess, social justice issue that is very relevant, especially when it comes to gun violence in America. And just the way the author wrote about it, I just, for that time that the book is set in, I just wasn't sure if it was executed that well. And it really took me away from the book. Having said that, there were many things I enjoy about the book. So the first one that I kind of touched on earlier was that even though this book is fictional, there were lots of call out to things that did happen in real life, like other video games or historical events that I really enjoy. It kind of reminded me of Carrie Soto's Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid, where a book is fictional, but it's kind of like semi-set in reality, and I really enjoyed that, especially because the book is mostly set in LA, Venice Beach, so there's a lot of call out to like celebrities, and that was like really fun for me to read. Other thing I really enjoyed is topics of time travel, because Sadie and Samson are friends over a decade. One thing I really love was after knowing someone for some time and seeing the past and their present. And I really love the idea of how, like, if you know someone, like a family member for like a long time or a friend for a long time, you look at them now and you see the past them in their current phase, but they look older, and in a way that's time traveling. And that was like really beautiful to me, that concept of time travel in reality right now. Another thing I really enjoy is I learned a new word called grok, which means, let me look it up, the to understand something intuitively or by empathy. Because of all commercials, children grok things immediately, or grok things immediately, and I really enjoy that word because that's totally defines Samson and Sadie's relationship and friendship. Just to know someone so well and just to be so intuitively aligned with someone, I really, really enjoy that. On Goodreads, this book, as it was one of the 2022 books of the year for Goodreads, it got a very high rating of 4.35 out of 5, which I can agree with. I really enjoy this book. It's really entertaining. I think for the masses, it's a great book to get you back into reading. It's exciting. I love the cover work. I love the origin story of the video game. But of course, I always share things why people didn't like this book. So on Goodreads, why people didn't like this book is they did not like any of the three protagonists, Sadie, Sam, and Marks. I can agree with that. They all had pretty non-redeeming qualities, except Marks. I actually did really enjoy Marks. I probably related to Marks most as a person. People thought the plot was all over, which I agree with. The pacing was kind of slow, and at some points it was tedious. So the book was very like, it would go really fast and really slow with no rhyme or reason, and there were too many plots, and I felt there were some plots that were like introduced but not really closed off. And the other reason is people like me felt it just tried to address so many social justice issues that probably weren't relevant for the 90s or 2000s. And then one thing that someone said that I didn't really notice, but now that they said it, I can't unsee it, is that there were so many words that were used in this book that aren't actually used in normal conversations. And there were some words I had to look up that the initial definition wasn't even relevant to the context of the book. So now that I think about it, there were lots of words I felt like Gabrielle pushed just to use big words, but it kind of took away from reading. So I definitely agree with that. Good reviews where people couldn't put the book down. I agree with it. I read it actually in just a few readings. I want to see what would happen next. People felt it made you genuinely invested in Sam and Sadie's relationship as individuals. I can agree with that. They were kind of like yin and yang of each other, and like it was kind of like even when they had fallen out, they could not be apart with each other. They could not be part of each other's life. So I really enjoyed that. And people also felt that there are lots of nuggets about life in this book when comparing video games to reality that I really enjoyed. So I think if you're a fan of video games, this book would be really relevant for you to read, and you'd be like, wow, I see all these parallels. Why I think you should read this book. I think you should read it if you like video games, if you like books that span over decades, if you like books about friendship and not just purely romance. I think this is a really great read. Now I'll share how this book made me feel, because if you ask me how what book was about, I'll probably in a week, a year, 5 years from now, I probably won't remember exactly what the book was about, but I'll also remember how it made me feel. So this book, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, it made me feel very warm about the friendships in my life. I'm very fortunate that I am in my mid-30s and I have friends that I've known since I was 3 years old, since I was 10 years old, and they're still a big part of my life that I talk to almost every day, and I really appreciate that. They've literally witnessed my life from childhood, and I've witnessed their lives, and it's really so beautiful, and I'm so grateful to have this life experience. Thank you for watching until the end of my book review for Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I do love the book cover for this book. I think it's really gorgeous. If you read this book, I'd love to hear what you thought down below. And if you want to join me next time, I'm doing a romance book. It's called Thank You Next by Andie J. Christopher. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.